LiberalViewer presents.
So the extent to which a candidate's religious beliefs should be a fair topic for scrutiny in a political campaign is an important issue, and Bill Maher on HBO's Real Time last week gave good examples of both when a candidate's beliefs should be subject to scrutiny and when they should not, beginning with the good kind of scrutiny you can see in this clip.
There's a lot of areas where Mitt Romney says it's off base. You can't ask. You can't ask about Bain Capital. You can't ask about Mormonism. What else is there? The fucking Olympics? You have to base this election on the luge? There was an article in the New York Times on Sunday about Mitt Romney's religion. And let me read this quote from his friend and fellow church leader, Grant Bennett, said, "Sometimes Mr. Romney would report that even though he had made a decision on the merits, prayer had changed his mind. Even though rationally this looks like the thing to do, he said, I just have a feeling we shouldn't do it." So let me get this straight. Sometimes Mitt Romney makes a decision based on rationality, but then a fairy whispers in his ear and he changes his mind.
Now, that's a good example of how a candidate's religion can raise a legitimate question about whether he or she should be elected, because when a candidate actually admits the supernatural will take precedence over the rational in making decisions, that's something that should concern rational voters, like rational voters were concerned in the 1980s when they learned Nancy Reagan had used an astrologer to make decisions about Ronald Reagan's presidency. But Bill Maher also criticized Mitt Romney's religion in a way that isn't really relevant to voters, as you can see in this clip.
Romney is a proud Mormon. Mormons believe that God is a 6'2", flesh and blood man. I'm not making this up. They're making this up. I'm telling you what they believe. A 6'2", flesh and blood man who lives on the planet Kolob. And this is who he's taking his orders from. I do feel that I have the right to raise my hand and say, what the fuck?
Yeah, but Bill.
Now, I don't believe in the Mormon God, but I also don't believe that criticizing the credibility of Mormon stories is a legitimate attack on Mitt Romney, because most major religions include some incredible stories, and as long as those stories don't affect rational decision-making, there are some good humanistic values that can be taken from many of those stories if they're properly interpreted, and it really makes no difference if candidates get their values from the stories of Mormonism, Judaism, The Lord of the Rings, or Star Trek, as long as those values are good humanistic values that motivate otherwise rational policies, which is just the point President Obama made last February at a White House prayer breakfast, explaining the importance of the religious values that often motivate sound policies based on good analysis in this clip.
If we leave our values at the door, we abandon much of the moral glue that has held our nation together for centuries and allowed us to become somewhat more perfect a union. Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, Jane Addams, Martin Luther King Jr., Dorothy Day, Abraham Heschel. The majority of great reformers in American history did their work not just because it was sound policy or they had done good analysis or understood how to exercise good politics, but because their faith and their values dictated it.
And not only did President Obama give historical examples of good public policies motivated by religious values, but he also gave specific examples of his own policies that were formulated rationally but motivated by good humanistic religious values, as you can see here.
When I talk about our financial institutions playing by the same rules as folks on Main Street, when I talk about making sure insurance companies aren't discriminating against those who are already sick, or making sure that unscrupulous lenders aren't taking advantage of the most vulnerable among us, I do so because I genuinely believe it'll make the economy stronger for everybody, but I also do it because I know that far too many neighbors in our country have been hurt and treated unfairly over the last few years. And I believe in God's command to love thy neighbor as thyself. I know that a version of that golden rule is found in every major religion, in every set of beliefs, from Hinduism to Islam to Judaism. to the writings of Plato.
So, whether it's from Plato or Jesus, it shouldn't matter how a candidate came to value the need to treat others as we would wish to be treated, so long as the candidate is willing to debate rationally the policies necessary to achieve that goal, which is also true for another example President Obama gave of his rational policies that are religiously motivated in this clip.
If I'm willing to give something up as somebody who's been extraordinarily blessed, and give up some of the tax breaks that I enjoy, I actually think that's going to make economic sense. But for me as a Christian, it also coincides with Jesus' teaching that for unto whom much is given, much shall be required. It mirrors the Islamic belief that those who've been blessed have an obligation to use those blessings to help others, or the Jewish doctrine of moderation and consideration for others.
So feeling a need to care for the poor and disenfranchised is a value I can support, whether it comes from a religious belief or some non-religious philosophy, and even though I'm not religious, I have no problem with candidates bringing their good humanistic religious values with them into the political arena, as long as their religious beliefs don't take precedence over irrational policy decisions, because religion shouldn't be used as some kind of cosmic magic 8-ball to give answers to policy questions that should be solved rationally, I think, but I want to know what you think. Is it appropriate for President Obama to praise the religious values that motivate public policies, given his proviso that those policies are also rationally justified? And regarding the first issue Bill Maher raised, should voters legitimately worry about the claim that Mitt Romney allows religious inspiration to change decisions he's already arrived at rationally?
I YouTube, you decide.